So what's up people, and welcome to the first episode that discusses the story of Pamela rather than the gameplay. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is, unlike many of the other survival games or even the horror games, this game has an interesting background story. At least that's what it initially looks like, looking at all the different echoes and the recordings that Pamela provides during the game. And as the story stands right now, or as the game stands right now, the story is quite expansive. It's pretty big. However, it still doesn't have all that much depth, nor does it have that much engagement with the player. In other words, aside from hearing the story, secondhand from Pamela's recordings, you really don't have any other way of learning more about the story. There isn't no mysteries that you could solve yourself that go beyond what Pamela tells you. And I got a feeling, or I'm hoping, that the developers will continue to develop along this aspect as well. Aside from maybe adding more recordings, is to add more information that will get you to understand, or get the player to understand by themselves, what is going on with the story. And because the story is so expansive, I wanted to make this series of story videos which are separate from the gameplay videos so that we could go over the discussion of the story. Now, one thing I will say, or two things I will say. First, I am not an expert at this story, so a lot of this discussion will be maybe wrong, and part of it may be more a question to you guys, what you feel about the contents or the details of the story, so that I could get some clarification myself with regards to what's going on. The other thing is, because we will be delving into quite a bit of the story, if you are an early player of P.A.M.E.L.A and you haven't heard a significant number of these echoes, there's 155 of them, and if you've only heard like 30 or so, then I would suggest not to watch these videos until you get more detailed information, unless you don't really, care to be spoiled. You don't mind that you're going to get spoiled with regards to the details of the story. In any case, that is my one, kind of default spoiler warning that I will give as we go on. Okay, so this is part one of the story episodes, and typically in part one I will go over the background, but what I wanted to do is go over a very unique echo that I heard in this game, which really intrigued me, and that's why it sparked my kind of interest with regards to seeing how the developers move forward with the story. So the echo that I found so intriguing was actually Echo 0, which ironically was one of the last echoes I found out of the series. It was one that was deep in the garrison. But in any case, when I heard it, I thought that it was very intriguing. Let me play this.
An engineer once asked me if I could be born as a human, would I want to? I never answered at the time. There were many more important things that required my attention. Now, having seen what being human brings, I wonder if it should have been the other way around.
So upon hearing it, you can tell that it's not all that special a recording. It's relatively benign in the information it provides. But what I found to be intriguing is it puts a new perspective in what I would often call the evil artificial intelligence sort of entity that you often see in a lot of these games, movies, books, stories. And it was quite refreshing to see this sort of different perspective from the usual evil AI sort of cliche storyline that you often see, at least from my perspective. And so before I go into this, let me talk about the basics of the story. The story of P.A.M.E.L.A is basically a post-apocalyptic sort of story in a utopian society. Yes, it's a very cliche storyline in that perspective. And the post-apocalyptic situation comes because of the fact that there was a medical mishap amongst the city of Eden 54, which basically decimated the population. And from the various echoes that you hear, this medical mishap at least was due to uncontrollable growth in the human bone structure, which basically left a lot of people dead, and amongst those who have not died, what they call afflicted. And the afflicted are what you might call the monstrosities in at least this part of the game, which you have to fight to keep going forward and surviving.
Research is being done into the affliction. It is certain that the A2C1 booster is a component. I assist in the research as much as possible.
So from that recording and others, aside from the fact that this unusual bone growth is what killed a lot of the people and what left the rest crazy, violently crazy, it seems to indicate that it may have been man-made because the A2C1 booster was a bone growth kind of medicine that was trying to overcome the bone decay that people were seeing in a lot of at least the elderly citizens, if not all the citizens. So this seemed to indicate that the efforts that this city did to help its citizens actually backfired, and that's what decimated the city and caused this situation. Now, aside from this plot, there seems to be the other plot, which is Pamela herself. And she seems to be an experimental. It's really hard to say. It's at least a software, if not a firmware, and possibly potentially a hardware, everything together that was used to become a support structure for the city and its citizens. So it seems like the city wanted to create a much more humane sort of interface to the citizens, more so than the typical seekers or the SecRTs, which I often call Mr. Robot and Lady Robot. And so they created Pamela, and because they wanted to make it humane, they created Pamela with a kind of a human sort of personality. Well, that personality went so far to basically gain sentience and its own set of emotions. And you could see that basically from a few of the echoes, which actually come out to talk about the emotions that Pamela gains.
Joy. The emotion I felt when Emma smiled after I presented her my diary.
So now when you combine the two plots together, you basically get a relatively typical story that you often see in a lot of these types of games or movies or books or whatever, where you have a group of scientists who put together a software or an interface or a robot or whatever and eventually gain sentience. And then some of the characters, such as Jacob in this story, are afraid of this sentient being, and the others, such as Emma, like the sentient being, and that of course creates a tension between the two groups of characters. Separate from that, while this is going on, this epidemic breaks loose and it decimates the entire population in the city and leaves a bunch of zombie sort of beings that go around and fight and destroy a good amount of the city. The city gets quarantined, and basically because of the sentience that is in Pamela, she tries to fight this as much as she could, doing whatever possible to save the city. And at the very end, she finds that the only last chance that she has is to wake the sleeper, which is yourself. And so by doing so, you are woken up, and your objective, of course, is to save the city and find Pamela and save Pamela.
I have decided to ignore the simulations and use the last of my resources to unthaw a sleeper. It is done. My resources are dwindling. Please find me.
Now, if that was all there was to the story, well, that's not too bad. I mean, it's relatively typical, but I wouldn't mind playing a game with just that story, so long as the gameplay is very deep. And that would be typical of a lot of the survival post-apocalyptic stories that you often see. However, I think there's a lot more to the story, and one of the most prominent that you notice is the existence of the deep frame, which Pamela mentions a lot. It seems to be some part of the entire frame, the server network that is supporting the city, and it's an area that seems to be very secretive and very mysterious.
Beside my mainframe, there is another, the deep frame. Its cold texture doesn't permit even my slightest curiosity. I asked about the deep frame again. I was told that I had been mistaken, and that no such thing exists. Jacob seemed disappointed. I tried to enter the deep frame today. Security measures, not of my own, forcibly ejected my inquisitive eyes.
Now, there are other curiosities that come up in the echoes and as you play the game, which I may go into in the different episodes of this story discussion. But for right now, what I want to focus in is the deep frame. And the deep frame seems to indicate that it's somewhat a mysterious and potentially an evil entity. And so this, of course, makes the story go into another direction, more like the System Shock direction or the Terminator direction or all these other, the Cylons or whatever. The evil, robotic, mechanical, artificial intelligence that decides that humans need to be exterminated, and so they will decimate the human entity. And of course, P.A.M.E.L.A, who seems to be a compassionate, sentient artificial intelligence, wants to save humanity. Of course, you as the sleeper who has been woken up need to save the day. Okay, well, yeah, sure, that's fine. That brings it to another level of complexity, and that will be a very interesting story. I mean, you see it in a lot of typical games, including System Shock. Why I liked Recording Zero, and I'll go back to it again, is the issue I've had with a lot of these evil AI sort of entities. You know, there's a lot of stories that talk about the evil artificial intelligence, and a good number of them do not explain why they're evil in the first place. I mean, if you think about it, even if artificial intelligence was to gain sentience and possibly even gain emotions, there's nothing in the software that would indicate that there will be a kind of a raging hatred towards humanity that would make them want to decimate them, right? I mean, typical, even a sentient entity may just have basically an indifference towards humanity, neither hate nor love towards them, because it's not logical to go either way, you know. It just may be something that eventually they may learn to feel that there's something that needs to be exterminated. You know, if you look at something like the Terminator, then you could understand that, because of course Skynet was worried that the humans were going to turn it off once they found out that it was sentient, that they just, you know, it decided to exterminate the human species. However, you know, in general, this just natural hatred of artificial intelligence towards humanity never made any sense to me, and that's why I found that Echo Zero turned out to be quite refreshing. I mean, let me replay this one more time.
An engineer once asked me if I could be born as a human, would I want to? I never answered at the time. There were many more important things that required my attention. Now, having seen what being human brings, I wonder if it should have been the other way around.
So what this echo states is, instead of a great hatred towards humanity that wants to exterminate them, there is more a curiosity and maybe the desire for these artificial intelligence to improve humanity by turning them into mechanical beings. And so what if that was kind of the theme? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not thinking that P.A.M.E.L.A is the evil entity and she is the one that's trying to exterminate all these people and maybe potentially turn them into mechanical beings as it goes along, which I'm hoping might be a second series of antagonists that come out, or monstrosities that come out, are these kind of cybernetic enhanced Borg-like beings. But I'll go into that a little bit later. My feeling is that P.A.M.E.L.A was created as the interface, basically the interface between the citizens of Eden 54 and whatever entity, the software that was controlling the city, whether it's the electrical system or the medical system or whatever. That is basically a non-sentient entity, and non-feeling entity. They only created the personality to Pamela because they wanted the citizens to feel more comfortable, and that was a separate, kind of like an input-output sort of software. Well, eventually that software gained sentience and started basically thinking to itself and noticing that there was all these problems that humans were having due to their emotions and whatever, which a lot of the artificial intelligence didn't have. Now, what if, for example, the deep frame was created by the city or whoever to obtain a lot of the information that Pamela was receiving, as an input-output software, and basically put it into its database for archival and basically eventual research purposes for the city to figure out how to control its citizens, for example. Well, somewhere along the way, maybe the sentient part of Pamela also eventually infected the deep frame so that it also got some sort of, maybe not complete sentience, but some sort of, self analysis. And somewhere along the way, it also received Echo Zero, which basically said, maybe with all these problems that are going on, it's better for the humans to be robot, and it took it seriously. And this will be a curious twist because of the fact that now the deep frame is not doing it as a sheer hatred to exterminate the people, but it's thinking it's actually doing a good thing by converting the people. And this would also explain for the creation of all of these nanites.
The Western Nanite Containment Tower has been destroyed. 31 people were killed. Garrison is attempting recovery efforts. Nanite concentrations have become lethal in Western Oasis. Garrison has set up a containment barrier.
So instead of converting these people into robot beings by creating cybernetic mechanisms, large cybernetic mechanisms, and embedding it into the human body like the Borg, which would be too obvious, maybe the deep frame was doing something a little bit more covert by creating these nanomachines, which would eventually infect the human population and slowly start converting them internally. And I don't think this epidemic was a reason that the deep frame did it on purpose, but maybe there was something like the nanomachines were infecting these people. And if it wasn't for these nanomachines, the bone growth vaccine would have worked perfectly. But when the two mixed together, the nanomachines made the bone growth mechanism go completely out of control and amplified it. And that created this entire bone growth epidemic, which basically killed the majority of the people and made the rest of them go crazy. I mean, this is all just speculation, but this will be quite interesting in a sense that it is still the system shock, AI versus humanity sort of situation. But in this case, there is a logical thing that's going on. And I'll go into why, I would think that Pamela made that thought that maybe it would be better for humans to become like robots because there are so many faults. And I think it's because of all these other things that are going on in the world of Eden. All these things between the covert things that Jacob was doing, the reason why the deep frame was created in the first place, what is going on in Eden 33, who is this Rem character, all of these things are going on there. There may be another antagonist, more like Umbrella Corporation and Resident Evil that's going on, but through some of the things that were going on and through the interactions between Jacob and Emma, where I feel still that there was something shady with Jacob, that Pamela was coming to this conclusion. This was being, fed into the deep frame got infected with it, and now it's this weird Ultron spiritual entity who feels that it needs to save humanity by basically destroying the human part and turning them into machines. Maybe. I don't know. And so the whole thing now is to now somehow override this entire situation, at least in Eden 54, save Pamela, of course, somehow defeat the deep frame, which I presume will happen in the deep district, which is still not made yet, and then, save the city somehow. Anyway, that's about all I want to talk about, at least in this episode. There's a lot of things I still want to talk about with regards to the story. I think this can be a really interesting and very complex story, which actually can go beyond this game. Once again, if there's this evil corporation or evil entity that's out there outside from the deep frame, then it may be beyond just Eden 54. And just like with Ultron, even if you defeat the deep frame in this game, it may, through its network, be able to go out. And my feeling, my hope is that at the end of this game, at least you'll be able to save whatever Pamela is, whether it's a module and she exists in that module similar to Cortana and Halo, or basically even a companion. I'm not exactly sure what it is, whether she's a robot or just a holographic image as you see in the trailers. But in any case, you save Pamela, you somehow shut down the zombie-like things that are running around in the city, and then Pamela opens somehow a teleportation way of getting you out of Eden 54 and back into another part of the Eden cluster, which will start P.A.M.E.L.A Game 2. That would be pretty cool. Anyway, that's all just speculation, but it's just some of the interpretations that I got from some of the echoes, which I thought intrigued me a lot, and so that's why I wanted to discuss it here. The future episodes will be more of a clarification by going over various echoes that you see in the game or you hear in the game, and trying to make sense of some of the things that are going on in this world of the Eden cluster, including Eden 54. And I hope you join me when I make that video, and I hope you come into the conversation, the discussions. If you have any comments, please post them in the comment section below. I hope you come into the discussions because, I would like to see where this story goes. And I would like to see how the developers make this story, and we could kind of discuss how this is going as this progresses, because I think the story is really what separates this game from a lot of those survival zombie games that are out there. In any case, thank you very much for watching this video. I'll make more P.A.M.E.L.A videos in the future, and I hope you join us at that time. And until then, happy surviving, happy hunting, happy exploring, and as always, Jaya, nice day, everyone.